Hi, I'm Harold Bell, and this is the Legends of Inside Sports and the Way We Were. Today's show, we really do have a legend of Inside Sports. His name is James Allen Preston. He is a native Washingtonian and a product of the DC public school system, where he was an outstanding athlete and earned a track scholarship to North Carolina College. After college, he was hired by the FAA, Federal Aviation Administration, as an air traffic controller.
It was after the service.
Okay, he shocked his colleagues and left that good government job to chase his dream for an acting career. First, there was Broadway and then on to LA. He is best known for roles as Alan Brooks in All's Fair, Ozzie Cleveland in Hill Street Blues, Leo Daughtry in Dallas, and Richard Matthews in Santa Barbara. He has played many judges in films, most notably in Air Force Colonel Judge Julius Alexander Randolph in A Few Good Men, starring Jack Nicholson, Tom Cruise, and Demi Moore. And, unbeknownst to him, there was the acting debut of his homeboy, Wolfgang Bodison. He now lives in semi-retirement in L.A. Without further introduction, let me introduce you to a true legend of inside sports, Mr. J.A. Preston. How you doing, my brother?
Good, and let me make one correction.
Okay.
You say A Few Good Men. You said Air Force. It's Marine Corps.
Oh, that's right, Marine Corps. Okay.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. In fact, the Marines changed their slogan after this picture from A Few Good Men to The Few, the Proud, the Marines.
Is that right?
Yeah, they didn't like that
okay.
story at all.
Okay. Let's start here at home, man, in Washington, D.C., talking about where you grew up, how you grew up, your family, and, of course, the D.C. public school educational system, this athletic program, and how that helped mold you into the man that you became.
Well, I was born at the beginning of the Franklin Delano Roosevelt administration, 1932, the Depression. Booze came back in. Of course, we still had bootleggers in the neighborhood because Washington had its blue laws. After 9 o'clock, you couldn't go to the liquor store, and Saturday nights it closed at 12 because of Sundays. So that was one of the professions you grew up seeing, was the guy on the corner with the long overcoat with a lot of pockets. But we seem to have all kinds of means of survival during that Depression era, just as the kids had great imaginations because we couldn't afford toys, so we created games, all kinds of street games, all kinds of games. We made scooters out of old wheels and orange crates and that kind of thing. I mean, that was our playtime. But we did have neighborhoods that subscribed to the African story that it takes an entire village to raise a child. Anybody in your neighborhood, any adult would correct you. And if they told your parents, then you'd be doubly in trouble. But the DC public schools were special because most of our teachers were people who had great educations, but they couldn't get jobs in their field, so they taught. So we had special teachers. Our classrooms were segregated, our schools were segregated. So there were things talked about that I don't think were ever mentioned in schools in the far north, like New York, that were supposed to be integrated because of their mixed racial student body and teachers. In DC, if you were a celebrity and you came into DC, you had to come and visit those schools. We only had 4 high schools, so everybody knew everybody. Um, and we were a very tight community. There weren't exactly ghettos, there were black neighborhoods.
Right.
Yeah.
Mhm.
In them were your churches. We had a black bank, um, North Carolina Mutual Insurance Company was the first black insurance company in America. That was in our neighborhood. And we had a variety of different churches.
The influence of churches in the neighborhood.
Well, in my neighborhood, I think the greatest influence was the Catholic Church,
Mhm.
St. Augustine. Jimmy Cobb was there. Gus Sims was there. Um, Everybody who lived in that area of Northwest from P Street up to U Street were in the St. Augustine Parish.
Mhm.
So, and we did have an Episcopalian church and a black Episcopalian church. Its minister was very influential in our neighborhood. He created a baseball team for us. We called him Father Brown, but he was a Episcopalian, so he was married and had a family.
Mhm.
But he came to school when, for people like myself who didn't have a father figure in the house, when I got in trouble, Father Brown came to talk to the whomevers in my behalf.
Mhm.
So it seems like we didn't have a great Baptist influence in my neighborhood, except for people like my mother, who sang in a choir, who ended up singing in St. Augustine's choir.
Mhm. Where did she go to church? What was her church before St. Augustine?
It was a church on Vermont Avenue.
Okay.
I can't remember the name of it. It was Shiloh, maybe, or something.
Okay.
But her hero was Marian Anderson. She was a contralto, and Catholic Church recruited all the singers they could find who sang
Right.
spiritual music and taught them to do Gregorian, and it had a sound they had never heard before.
Right. I asked you that question about church because my great grandfather laid the first brick to build Mount Airy Baptist Church, which was several blocks from Armstrong High School. He laid the first brick in 1893.
Okay.
Mount Airy Baptist Church. So that was my church. I came from far northeast to come to Mount Airy Baptist Church, and had a great influence on me because growing up with early is my grandmother. She kind of raised us, and we would go to church 3 or 4 times a week,
Mm-hmm.
and to Mount Airy Baptist Church. So that had a great influence on our foundation because Surgeon Quarters was right there next to the church.
Mm-hmm.
So after church on Sundays, we went out to Surgeon Quarters to visit the sick and the hospitals. So I learned about the community real early. That's why I just wanted to ask
Oh yeah,
about the
well,
church.
we had I had 3 cousins, male cousins, who were we were very close, and they lived in Linden Church, Maryland. My youngest cousin was a professional heavyweight boxer, and he was also a preacher. He had his own church there. Um, so we did have. I mean, I was always happy to go to their church
Mm-hmm.
because the Catholic Church, it was tough then to stay awake.
Right.
I mean, they were saying Mass in Latin, and the
Right.
priest would say the epistle for this week, and he would,
Mm-hmm.
there was no grease in it,
Right,
So
right,
it was, always great to go out to, they had music. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it was like
Soul, man.
yeah, it was a party. I mean,
Yeah.
everybody left there really up,
Mm-hmm. Well, you went from elementary, middle school to Armstrong High School. Going to Armstrong High School, you went to where there were some not only great teachers but great coaches like McIntyre,
Oh
Mr.
yeah.
Baltimore,
And
and
Charlton Stewart, who was the track coach.
okay, it was track coach. I didn't know who the track coach was. But
Yeah, he was a wonderful person.
Is that right?
Oh,
Okay.
absolutely.
Yeah, that that experience there, and in the DC public schools, right across the street, you had the legendary Jesse Chase. You know, Sal Hall at Cadoza.
Absolutely.
Dave Brown over at Phelps.
Yeah.
You guys came out under some great coaches, man. Not only great teachers, but a lot of great coaches.
We did indeed, and they took us not just to the physical, but to the mental of sports, and that was really an advantage, especially track. I mean, I thought track was all you did was run, but there were so many components involved. And they were components that have helped me in everything that I've done. And it was about being able to take your mind somewhere else. And no matter what your body was saying, I can't do, your mind could make it do whatever it needed to do. You could take your mind away from the pain. So it was great in terms of when you got into acting, you could actually zone. You didn't have to think about the words. You'd learned them already, so you didn't think words. It just happened. It just happened, and that was what running became. You practice, 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 and when it came time to compete, you didn't think about running.
During that time too, J.A., Cadoza had some great track teams. I understand you guys.
Marcellus, Boston.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I understand you guys were right on time too. Talking to guys like
we were better than they were. We were better than.
Yeah, that's what they said.
Yeah. We were on the first sports program here in DC. Tony Waitman, a little room about the size of, I don't know. We were up against a backdrop, and there was about this wide, four of us, and there was a little camera up here, and they interviewed us on television.
Wow.
We and Georgetown University were like the hero track teams of Washington, because they beat everybody in the mile relay, 2-mile relay, and so did we. Pen relays.
Y'all were participating in pen relays back there.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. No, we were a Championship of America team. Wow. And we ran in the AAU out at American University, and we were the only high school team in the event.
Oh.
Yeah, we were. Our mile relay team and our 2-mile team were 4 6-footers, which was kind of tall in those days in high school.
Right. You guys, Armstrong, some great athletes came out of there. Vader Stone, Gary Mays, Big Doug Robinson, you name them. Great athletes. Willie Wood. We could go on and on. And I know too that out of Armstrong High School came two Hall of Famers, and that's Lynn Ford and Willie Wood. I think back there during that time, you got Jesse, got Dunbar across the street. You got Cadoza not far from you. Of course, Phelps. And then that, you say y'all were close, a close-knit community. All the athletes knew each other.
Yeah, they did. They did. Because we competed against each other several times during any given season. And, some of the guys lived in the same neighborhood. I mean, there was a choice between Dunbar and Armstrong because they were different. Armstrong, most of us were in engineering college preparatory course. Dunbar, they called them the poets. We were called the techs. They were academic. We were mathematics and engineering.
Another thing that when I first came to high school, the cadet corps was always big time. You know, I mean, the competition. You know, that was competition, just like football, basketball, that students look forward to.
Griffith Stadium was the competitive drills.
Okay, right.
Well, at the time I came to Armstrong, it was mandatory. You had to be cadet corps. It was mandatory. Once you became an athlete, you have to do that anymore.
Wow.
That was that. See? But when you came, you knew that was going to be. We had a retired African American major who was in charge of the cadet corps at Armstrong.
Well, you went from Armstrong to North Carolina College. Of course, two fantastic individuals when it comes to sports. Leroy Walker and John McClendon. Yeah, I mean, guys, innovators. Of course, Leroy Walker went on to become not only an outstanding coach in the CIAA, but he went on to become the president of the Olympic Committee, the first black president of the Olympic Committee. What kind of influence did he have on you, Jay?
Well, Leroy was called Sporty. Sporty Walker. The year that he brought us there, he brought guys from Brooklyn Boys High. He brought a guy named Jim Caffey from Chicago CYO. He brought Lee Calhoun, who went to the Olympics the next year from a school in North Carolina. A couple of years after, he started bringing people in from the West Indies, and then he started bringing people in from Kenya. So Leroy got around, and he was a salesman. He'd get you there. He'd play basketball with the, in the gym with the guys. When he brought us there, he was still working on his doctorate at Columbia. He was quite a guy. He was very serious about the sport, but he could be. I had almost a photographic memory, and he would have us come in after the first exams that we took at school, and he'd look at the guys and he said, "Do not hang around with Preston. He's making good grades. You are failing. Leave him alone." Because we had to get the grades. Right. So I'd read it, and I could walk away and hang out because it would just pop.
Right. During that time, where was your competition in the CIAA as far as track is concerned? I asked you that because when I got to Winston-Salem, they supposed to had a great track team with guys like Eli Gilbert.
It was Morgan State.
Morgan State, okay.
Morgan State had Art Bragg. It had George Vincent Roden. I mean, they were pretty powerful.
Right.
Yeah. Right. But Carolina under Walker just kept getting stronger and stronger until they were just.
He was recruiting from all over the world.
Yeah, and it wasn't about Morgan State. It wasn't about Winston-Salem. It was about every college in the U.S. and then world teams.
Right.
We had outgrown, the CIAA in track before the rest of the sports even counted because they were still segregated. You didn't play football against Duke or University of North Carolina, but you ran track against them. Right. You didn't play basketball against them, but you ran track against them. As long as there was no touching or contact sports, you could compete. And we ran track against them, and we could beat them.
Where did military service come in?
Out of Carolina. Duck Wheeler, Jim Young, and I left to go into the military. we scored pretty high. I scored very high, so I had the choice of any direction I wanted to go in the military. So actually, I finished at Howard because I went back to school after the military, and I was messing around. I got married in school, looking for a job that paid me some money because I had a kid.
Mm-hmm.
Ran into a guy who said, "Hey, what you did in the military makes you qualify as an entry employee with CAA, which was what the agency was called at the time.
Mm-hmm.
It was under the Department of Commerce. So they sent me to the Aeronautical Academy, which was in Oklahoma City. And from then, it was like a couple of years we were still at Washington National Airport with mediocre equipment and what have you, and we began to grow. It was like when I went in, there was one black who was an ex-Tuskegee Airman who also flew C-121s, 131s for military air transport, but he couldn't get a job as an airline pilot.
Mm-hmm.
At the time, they were not taking it. So he became an air traffic controller. We had another one, Harry Burton, who had a master's degree in air transportation. He had been in the Air Force, but he was not a pilot. And they had Ralph McKnight, who was an airborne communicator. So when I came, I made the fourth air traffic controller black. Um, and it was tough. I mean, it was obvious as all the stories we all told each other. They didn't want us, but it became uh, a great place to be, and people acknowledged our capabilities. Before I left, we had something like 14. And during Rick Jones's time, they had crew chiefs and supervisors and deputy administrators, you name it.
Mm-hmm. Well, when did you get that urge that you wanted to try something else?
Well, yeah, I don't know. Being in sports is performance.
Yeah.
It's entertainment,
Mm-hmm.
and that was probably there somewhere in me. And I didn't, and my neighborhood was full of people who were musicians and what have you. No actors, but musicians. When I went to Carolina, Ivan Dixon was um, a sophomore when I was a freshman, and he became a formidable actor, raised in the Sun, the movie. But it just wasn't something that I was really interested because I'd grown up with images that I didn't really like, that in the movies that they had of black people. So I figured that I'd never be able to be an actor because this was stuff I wasn't going to do.
Mm-hmm.
Until I saw Roscoe Lee Brown, who was like a big star in track when I was running, when I had started running in high school. I mean, Roscoe was a world-class 800-meter runner with Herb McKinley, Mel Whitfield, all those guys. And he had become an actor in New York, and he had won several awards. And he was in Washington doing a show. And Max Banks, Julian,
Mm-hmm.
who I grew up with, told him to look me up. And he invited me to see his show. And I said, wow. I mean, this guy was extraordinary. So the theater that I went to see the play, I had met a woman there who said, "Are you an actor?" And I said, "No, I'm not." She said, "Well, you ought to be." And I said, Oh yeah. So she told me she had classes, and that I should come to her classes at the theater. And I mulled around in my mind, but it just really wasn't something I took serious until a buddy of mine who was a helicopter pilot and I were hanging out one night. And I said, look, there's this acting class. And he said, what acting class? It's 7 women to every man. So we went to the class and, just as observers. And the lady said, you can't do that. You can't just sit around and watch. You have to get involved here. So we did some theater games, and it was the last time they saw him. But I went back, and I liked it. It was like liberating. I never been in a situation where you were allowed to fall on your face and be comfortable with it because everybody else was taking chances at things, and so the companies from New York started to hire me when they came to Washington, and I started getting reviews in the Washington newspaper, and my organization, FAA, began to know what was happening with my sick leave and my annual leave. And they said, hey, come on, let's be straight about this. This is not a reality. People want to do this, but your chances of making it in this kind of business is, like zero. You got a career here, and it reached a point where I said, okay, let's do this. Let me take a leave of absence for like a year. And the chief controller said, and then you'll come back and you won't mess with this anymore. We won't have to. I said, right. He said, okay, we got a deal here. So I went to New York, and after about 3 months, I said, I ain't going back. No, this is another world.
Got the bug.
It was the variety of people that you came in contact with. It's like that old series. There are 8 million stories in the Naked City. I mean, it was incredible. So yeah.
Yeah. So how long in New York before LA?
Oh, about 10 years.
Oh, 10 years.
Yeah,
wow.
and because we were arrogant and elitist at the time. We said, we're going to go out to Hollywood, please, And for us as black actors, it was like, what are you going to do? Go do Superfly? And Ron O'Neal and I lived in the same building. He said, he came home one day and he said, Jim, he said, I got this film. I said, great. He said, no, it's a piece of garbage. He said, he said, a guy who worked for an advertising agency who I knew in Cleveland wrote this thing called Superfly, and he asked me to do it. And I said, well, okay, well, cry all the way to the bank. He said, I ain't getting paid. He said, what they gave me was a percentage. Well, I can tell you. And there was that.
Yeah. Wow.
So, but that's the way things happen. And but we looked at the kind of stuff that they were doing as movies, and just said, "Oh no."
That's good. That's a good entree. Black exploitation movies back there in the 70s, man. Had you gone to Hollywood then when these things were hitting big?
No, I wouldn't go there. That's when I
would not go there.
See, it's and I got hired for Spook Who Sat by the Door in New York.
Okay.
So the interesting thing about those films, you look around and see who you can find
today
who had a career after those films, and it wasn't because of the films. It was because most of these films didn't want to pay anybody, so they didn't get the best of our young actors.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Yeah, it's films like Shaft, Cotton Comes to Harlem.
well,
Some
that's when they were getting big. See,
big.
they were getting
Okay.
some money invested then.
Okay.
You know,
Right.
studios were doing these.
Okay.
Gordon Parks directed Shaft.
That's right. He sure did.
You know,
Hmm. Wow. You know, I look back and I see some of the great talent that came out of Washington D.C. You know, Robert Hooks, Maxwell Banks. I didn't realize that Max had gone into business before you.
oh yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah.
Maxwell, Robert, and you know, I made her my homegirl because she was so beautiful, Pam Grier, from out of
But
Baltimore.
yeah,
Hmm.
I didn't know Pam was from
Well, yeah,
Baltimore.
she was from Baltimore. Yeah,
I
Pam
didn't
is
know.
from Baltimore, man. And of course, Hope Clark was my classmate at Spingarn High School.
Fantastic dancer. She
Yeah,
became an actress, but she was fantastic. Yeah.
fantastic dancer. That's
And of
right.
course, Debbie Allen went to Howard.
Yeah.
You know, Roxy Rucker went to Howard, and there were some really fine playwrights who went to Howard who did a lot of stuff in New York. I think Charlie Fuller was from Philly, but I think he went to school here.
Hmm.
He wrote Soldier Story.
Oh yeah, that was great. That was great. Yeah.
So you know, it's you know, before us, well, as a contemporary actually, Chita Rivera was a Dunbar. Uh, she was Dolores Figaro at the time, and she became Chita Rivera when she did West Side Story.
Right.
And Lewis Johnson, who went to Armstrong, who ran track, who was a dancer, and her went to New York together at the same time, and he was one of the choreographers of Damn Yankees.
Wow.
Yeah.
Mm.
So you know the entertainment scene has always been strong here, and during the Depression years, for a black to really succeed to get to the big time, he either had to be an athlete or a musician. There was nowhere to go as a pro baseball player, pro football player until Jackie Robinson. So what we saw is people who were successes were fighters, prize fighters, and people who were entertainers.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Otherwise, you had to be a doctor or a lawyer. Your practice was going to be limited to the black neighborhood, so you weren't going to become world famous unless you were like a Charles Drew or somebody.
Right. You jumped finally from New York to LA and looked like things really started happening for you. Of course, you made some. You were in some great pictures. A Few Good Men, uh, which Jack Nicholson, um, Tom Cruise,
Well,
Demi Moore.
that's the A list.
That's the A list.
Yeah,
Right.
that was the A list, and that was someplace that I really wanted to be because you know you make movies and you make movies, and there's sometimes they're good people in them, but they're not considered the A list
Right.
until it's people like Tom Cruise, Jack, you know.
Mm-hmm. So 18, that was like what the B list?
Well, that's
No,
television.
it's television. Yeah, that
Yeah,
was television. Yeah.
yeah, television was a whole separate thing.
Mm-hmm.
And in those days, you didn't find a lot of stars, except stars on their way down, who did television, or you had people who were television stars. And but now you find that stars who say, "I don't want to go do this moving picture thing. I want to be in one place. You know where I'm going to be next year," and they go to television, and they make enormous money. Enormous money.
We were talking earlier about the spook that sat by the door. The book was fantastic, but the movie, you didn't think that much of.
No, I didn't. I think they didn't do any creativity in the editing. I mean, they put all that CIA stuff up in front, and it was dull.
Mm-hmm.
On in print, when you use your imagination, it worked.
Right.
Problem was, Sam Greenlee wrote the film script, and he wrote the book,
Oh.
and he wrote the film script from the book. I mean, he didn't, do anything creative. Also, the fact was that it was a book that people were not going to put money into, Hollywood. So they were out on the bag, and they, got money from people that was as little as $5.
Mm.
And what would happen would be they'd get enough money to shoot 2 or 3 scenes, and they'd shoot the 2 or 3 scenes,
Go back
and
out.
they were gone, man. I'm in New York working, and they're telling me, "Hey, you got a job out here. We're getting ready to shoot." I said, "Hey, you better get that straightened out, because I haven't heard from you for 2 months.
Right.
What am I supposed to be doing? Sitting around waiting for you?"
Yeah.
Well, okay. Well, when can you come out?
You told me that was a problem. You finally had to tell the folks in New York, look, I want to do this.
Yeah, well,
They told you, said, well, the bosses ain't gonna like it. You going out to do the spook.
Well, I was doing a soap then, Another World.
Okay.
But they had, there were a lot of resistance to that book, and surprisingly, so many people had read that book. I mean, it was one of the books that just black people read.
Right.
I mean, it was, and the producer of Another World, when I told him I wanted to take my time off to do movies, because that was in the contract, a movie, and he said, "Oh, what is it?" And I told him, and he said, he said, "I love the book, but," he said, "I don't know whether, sponsors are gonna like you doing this." I said, "What? What is, what's the problem? I mean, it's a story, So, after
the story scared a lot of white folks.
Yeah, well, it did, and it is something that could never happen now.
Mm-hmm.
It could have happened in those days, but it's something that could never happen now.
Right.
To even get near that is, this would be called treason.
Right.
Instead, what they were, the only crime they really committed was bank robbery.
Right.
To get money,
Mm-hmm.
because there was a robbery of a military armory. But, people have done that. There have been a couple of groups who robbed armories for weapons. I think the Weathermen in the 1960s, late 60s, early 70s, Vietnam War protesters robbed armories to get weapons. So it was an idea that scared a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
And I can see why, but who knows what went through the CIA's head about hiring blacks after reading that book. So but we know that went by. I mean, for a long time, J. Edgar Hoover wouldn't hire anybody black for the FBI. I mean, forget it.
Yeah.
CIA, to function properly, would have to have, if not black agents, black operatives, because they were trying to get inside of the Panthers and all these groups, the FBI and Martin Luther King movement. I mean, infiltrated the civil rights movement because they were saying it was communist inspired and all that kind of stuff. So they had to hire blacks,
Mm-hmm. You know, speaking of that, you had to make a decision yourself from another world. You had to say, "Hey, well, I'm going to do this because it was something that you felt
Yeah.
that you
Well,
needed to do."
and to tell you the truth, it really wasn't a hard decision.
Mm-hmm.
It was an exciting idea because having read the book, it was continuous thought as, wow, they'll never make a movie of this. And then all of a sudden, somebody was making a movie of this. They couldn't hire OJ. They definitely couldn't hire Sidney.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what to hire any of those guys to do the spook would be to say this guy's going to be something special, which would mean that you have given away the plot.
Yeah.
So, and then you couldn't get those guys to do this.
Right.
They were not going to risk
risk their career.
And they had a lot more to lose than Lawrence Cook, who did the spook, and I had to lose.
Mm-hmm.
It was like, hey, the worst I can get out of this is a picture, and I don't have any pictures to my credit because I didn't do any of the blaxploitation films. So hell, if I'm going to have a picture, why not this?
Mm-hmm. And as we said, how popular that book was. That picture was what year was that?
It must have been 1972 or something.
Okay. Well, 1972 to 2 years ago, you were invited to a film festival down in Annapolis.
Yeah.
To discuss the spook that sat by the door.
Because they had shoved it into the corner for so long that it had been an underground cult movie. We opened. We had a premiere opening in New York. And by that time, United Artists owned it because these guys just went collapsed in terms of begging money altogether. I think Cosby gave them some money, and they had to find a distributor. So United Artists had it. United Artists opened it in New York with no publicity. It was open for 1 week, and it was gone.
Wow.
It was gone. They didn't make DVDs or videotapes. You couldn't find it. I mean, it was like people said, what happened? If I know why you asked me, I don't know.
Right.
I don't know where it is. I'd like a copy. What? So, it was that kind of thing. And, after, 20 years, people said, I think I saw a copy of The Spook Set by the Door in a tape store. And, there would be a few somewhere here and there. And then I was surprised when I went to Annapolis. I mean, most of the people who came to that festival were white.
Wow.
Well, it was a white film festival. So Rick came down from Washington, and Courtney came down from Courtney and Ken Cave came. My children, Malcolm's daughter was there.
That was about it.
A few scattered people, and I said to my daughter, I said, what's happening with the blacks in the community? I said, you live in this community. What do you know? She said, well, I don't know. I said, you don't know. She said, well, I wasn't doing the publicity. I said, you should have done some if that's, But
wow. Well, let's move from that spook that's set by the door to the present day spook that's set by the door. Colin Kaepernick. What do you think about Colin Kaepernick and the things that are going on in the National Football League? Protests, of course, you were back there with the real protesters. We were talking about Malcolm, and we were talking about Paul Robeson.
And this is the thing about this whole thing that really surprises me. Um, the president did not get involved in those protests. And they were there for Kennedy and Johnson and Nixon. And Nixon, responded, but it wasn't. He didn't respond too overtly because it was just too overwhelming. I mean, this to me, I guess many people from the 60s, 70s are saying, "What's the big thing? Why not? What's the big thing about somebody protesting?" When we watch people burn flags and all that kind of stuff, uh, there is a reason for this that is obvious to everybody in the world, not just in America. They're saying to you right out in the open, you're killing black people for no reason and you're getting away with it. Now, we serve this country in the military and in every other fashion. We're asking you, why do you want us, why can we not say to you, this flag that you are demanding us to deal with as a religious symbol not be challenged on the basis of how you have represented it? And I think everybody who thinks understands that. But to say that in doing this, you're against the troops, against the country, is absolutely ridiculous. And they did that in the 60s and the 70s.
Jay, when it comes to racism, they always want to change the narrative.
Well, that's what racism is about. I mean, it's truly, if there were no competitiveness involved in racism, then we could say, well, maybe it's about something else. But it is always about, with jobs in America, let's get rid of the illegal immigrants because they're taking the jobs that white people would have. They're not. They're not. You wouldn't work for that money. You don't want to do those jobs. And the people who are hiring these immigrants are people who are saying to you, we shouldn't have these immigrants because they are taking your job. Now, what is that? That's a total hypocrisy. And that turns the American lower classes against the immigrant. And that's the purpose. And that's the only purpose. Because they're going to have immigrants. And now they're going to have legal immigrants that they can low pay because they have just broken Puerto Rico. And those people are going to migrate here and they're going to be able to pay them low wages, no benefits.
Yeah. This is a nation of immigrants.
It is. It's a nation of immigrants, and Donald Trump, whose workers who did his construction stuff were Polish. See, now we don't call them immigrants, illegal immigrants. They came here to do a job. See, now his wife is newly here. You see, and I don't know. Maybe she is not in accord with him because she certainly doesn't look like. At times he's talking, she looks mortified.
Distance. She looks distant and mortified.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
I think about the sacrifices of Malcolm. I think about the sacrifices of Muhammad Ali. The stands that these guys took. You had a chance to see my interview with Muhammad Ali. He's one of the most fascinating individuals that I ever come in contact with because he was consistent.
Yeah,
You
well,
know, what you saw was what you got. Tell us about it, how you felt about
well,
um,
listen, I have to give a lot of credit to Malcolm.
mhm.
I have to give a lot of credit to him because Ali was, or Cassius Clay was a kid who was all over the place. I mean, he was about convertible Cadillacs and, you know, and that kind of popcorn publicity and fame. Um, Malcolm touched something in him that said, you can take this fame and do a lot with it. You have the power, the personality, the charisma. People want to be around you. They look at you. They, you know, hey, he started out as a tool for Elijah Muhammad. I mean, you know, this was a tool he was going to use, but he became his own man. And he had to become his own man because he saw that it was him that the focus was on, him that would take the kick in the butt, him that would either get the glory or the defamation. And he really found that out, I think, when they took his title, because he didn't get the support. And I feel like from that point, we saw a man who said, it's what I can do. It's not what they can do. And if what I can do gives them credit, fine. But it's what I can do. So I'm not going to ask permission. I'm going to do this. I'm going to say that. This is who I am. This is what I'm about. And I think it was the simplicity of the man that made him so effective because he was so childlike. You know, I met him once, and I was walking up 8th Avenue, and he was sitting in this motel on a couch that was facing the window out towards 8th. Mm-hmm. And I saw him, and I said, "Hey, man," and he said, "Hey." So I went in. And I had the script. I was coming from rehearsal, and he said, "Let me see that." He took it and looked at it. He said, "You're an actor?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "I'm an actor." I said, "I know." And, you know, just talking to him, you know, he's so fascinated with everything, you know. Right. So, you know, it was like, you know, and you turned him loose, and there was this great intelligence. But it was a purity because he was not a guy who grew up in a sophisticated environment. So lots of things. I mean, everything. I mean, he must have gone through all kinds of culture shock because he was constantly being bombarded with new things. I mean, there were people that were big as the country itself who wanted to shake his hand, wanted to meet him, wanted to talk to him. I mean, hey, this is the super fast lane, you know, for a kid from Louisville, Kentucky, right? Right. Not somebody from Louisville, Kentucky who went to college and, you know, majored in this or that, but a kid who was a fighter. Fighter. Made a hell of an impression, man, on everybody. Yes, he did. Came in contact with. Yes, he did. Mm-hmm. Yes, he did. Yeah. Well, man, you've done some fantastic things, man, and you've kept it real, kept your feet on the ground. Well, I think that's one of the things that you see in someone like Ali. He never lost the common touch, mm-hmm. And they wanted to make him royalty. You know. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But he didn't. I mean, he was about the common man, man. Everybody. Well, he was every man. Yeah. I mean, and being in the profession he was in, you know, the gladiator. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, Jim, this has been a fantastic interview. I want to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to come home, man, and be a part of the Legends of Inside Sports.
Yeah.
And I know my wife wished that she had been here to meet you.
Oh yeah, and I'm sorry I missed her. And hey, Hattie, happy anniversary! I know it's your anniversary because your husband told me.
But Jim, I just want to say, man, that this has been a long time coming. I've been hearing about you, of course, from our friend Richard Jones. He's the one that hooked this up, and I'm glad that we got a second chance.
Don't erase this one.
Man, we are blessed. No, I'm not going to let you touch it. I'm not going to let you touch it. But man, please come back.
Oh,
you
yeah,
understand?
Yeah,
please come back, man.
In the long run, this is home. And,
right.
Yeah.
And next time we come, we get with Ed Wells and some of the other guys, man.
Fantastic.
I know they want to hook it up.
That'd be good.
Well, that's going to be it for this segment of the Legends of Inside Sports. I'm Harold Bell, and remember that every black face you see is not your brother, and every white face is not your enemy. Until next time, you can color me gone.